Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a very well-deserved Christmas break, and I'm wishing everyone a happy New Year. I could not be more excited to be getting back in the swing of things, and I think I'm coming to you guys with an exceptionally important episode this week, and that is on the importance of listening. Now, the reason I want to emphasize the value and the impact of being a good listener is because our society is becoming more and more disruptive to one another. We're becoming more divided, and in a world where we value and we seem to emphasize the importance of speaking more than listening, it's becoming ever more critical that we can actually take a moment to hear each other out before we rip each other's heads off. So, there's been a significant decline in one's ability to pay attention critically and, more importantly, to be present in a conversation in an ever more quickening world, and especially as our world has become more and more digital. Without the face-to-face contact, it's almost like we're losing the skill of being able to look someone in the eyes and listen to them as they tell us something that might be important to them, or a story or anything. We're all too quick to want to just raise our hand and be the next person to input and turn the story around into something that you want to say, without actually truly valuing and reflecting on the things that other people are saying. Now, the first of the topics I'd like to discuss is on the power of listening itself. And I'd like to highlight a few benefits just as a reminder. All of these are very obviously understood, but I think they're one of those things that bear repeating just as a refresher for ourselves. Now, of course, not only can listening help improve our relationships, not only with friends and our actual significant others, but also with family, in professional settings, and of course in academic settings. Now, the reason that this matters is because it can help prevent misunderstandings, and misunderstandings are the biggest driving force of conflict. This is becoming, as I mentioned in the introduction, ever more relevant because more and more people are not taking a chance to actually process what is being said by people with a differing opinion, and that leads to an internalization of anger and resentment. And it can very quickly turn sour when you haven't actually maybe understood what the other person is trying to convey, or maybe you're already overthinking what they might be saying instead of listening and clarifying what you might think. One of the benefits of being a better listener is also, and I want to highlight this one especially, it leads to greater empathy because it means that we can understand each other more. And I think it goes without saying that a lack of understanding of one another is what has caused us to be such a divided society right now. When we don't listen to one another, we forget what it even means to have our own story because we're so self-absorbed in our own narrative that we forget that other people have lived their lives. They've lived an entirely different story that we might not have heard yet. And that's why it's almost our responsibility to take a chance to hear someone out, hear where they're coming from, hear why they might have arrived at whatever it is their current belief is. This is ever more relevant in terms of politics, or in terms of advocacy for different policies or climate change or any sort of controversial or divisive opinion that somebody might have. We're forgetting that there is a lot of backstory that leads to an individual's decision to be, of one mindset as opposed to another. And we're never going to find that out unless we uncover that story by listening. So this is why I want to highlight this, because it really is something that is important for us to get better at. Now, one of the ways that we can improve our listening is through something called active listening. Now, this is something that includes 4 components, and these are attention, understanding, responding, and remembering. Now, before I dive into these, the important thing to remember with active listening is that we prevent and we withhold ourselves from listening to something that somebody's saying and automatically trying to think of a response. The idea is to be as mindful and as present in that conversation without trying to formulate your response or solutions to whatever the problem is or any sort of different thing. You are just there to absorb the information that's being given to you. And that is what's meant by the first point, by attention. You give the other person your undivided attention without your mind wandering. The next is understanding. So while someone is talking to you and describing their story or their opinion or anything, you clarify, you ask questions back to them so you can make sure that you are understanding what they're saying. This, of course, obviously prevents miscommunications. The third thing is responding. Now, you want to keep responses to a minimum, but if you do respond, you want to make sure that you are not diminishing the other person's story. You're basically adding or encouraging them to continue to build off of their argument. And then, of course, the final thing is remembering. Obviously, this goes with the first thing, with the first point, which is attention, but you want to make sure that you're actually internally remembering and storing the information that the other person is giving you. I think it's one of the worst feelings in the world when you're having a conversation with someone and you can tell that the information is going in the one ear straight out the other. You just feel like, why am I even talking to you? So I don't think there's anything nicer when someone actually cares and is invested in a conversation. And it's very clear when somebody is. So this is what we mean by saying that you should understand and remember the things that they're saying, the details, because it really highlights the quality of your character. Now, there are a few barriers to our effective listening, and these things start with a preoccupation to our self-expression. Now, this all goes back to the idea that we have grown far too in love with our own voices, and that is very oxymoronic for myself to say because I am speaking to a camera right now, and you know what? I am already sick of my own voice. But anyway, a good way to think of this is there are thousands of courses online that involve getting better at public speaking, articulation, voicing your expression, debating. But there are no courses, there is no educational material out there that really explains how to be a good listener. And this disparity shows that there is a prevalence towards one form of behavior over another. Now, of course, there's also the fact that we live in a very digital age as well. And like I mentioned before, when you're not face to face with someone, when you can't actually see another person and look at them and look at their body language, look at the way they're expressing themselves, we forget that it's another human being on the other end of that screen. Let's say when we're texting a message, that actually has their own life, their own mind, the way that they're thinking and everything. So when we receive a message or we receive some input of information, we are so quick to just almost move past it, like ingest. Okay, I see what you're saying. Move on. I'm like my response. And you're so prioritized on your response because you forget that it's another human that we're interacting with. Now, these are two of the biggest barriers that I think we're seeing more and more prevalent throughout our society, especially in the younger generations, which are growing up with more and more technology. We're forgetting at an ever increasing rate what it means to just have a good conversation with one another. And there are serious consequences to not listening. Of course, there's the biggest things, which are on relationships and communication itself. Like I mentioned, poor communication can lead to misunderstandings, which lead to conflict, which lead to division. And this is significant. This is bad. I think something that I've noticed a lot more recently, especially in North American culture, is how people don't really care to listen truly to what people have to say. At least from my experience, I feel like the conversations and the retention of information is very surface level. It's very shallow. And I think that this can lead to overall poor, weak relationships. I feel like very few people, I should say, have deep, meaningful, strong connections with more than one or two people. And I think that's actually quite a shame because especially coming from a culture that's very warm in Greece and the majority of Mediterranean Europe, people very much value one another's opinion. The way that we speak and interact and communicate is very intentional. And that's something that I feel like is lacking in North American society, which I really think should be adopted sooner rather than later. Now, I'd like to provide a couple strategies for how to become a better listener. So as I was mentioning when I discussed the concept of active listening, I want to also highlight the idea of being more mindful in conversations. So again, this basically means to remain present in a conversation. Try as much as you can to stay in the moment. Really try and focus all of your attention on what another individual is saying without the need, again, of wandering your mind. I think you'll find it harder than it might initially seem, especially if you're someone that is constantly busy-minded, that has a lot going on. I feel like it's very easy for ourselves to just find ourselves slipping away, even mid-conversation. So practice trying to be a little bit more present and even reminding yourself to do so. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is about being more patient. So like I said, obviously, the additional benefit of being more empathic with other people is truly relevant. But this also comes with the idea of being more patient. So in other words, instead of growing irritable or impatient at what someone else is saying, and in your mind just saying like, wrap up, okay, I understand, or whatever, or edging people on by saying with little nudging terms like, yeah, yeah, okay, okay, yeah. I think it's important to also take a second and try and slow ourselves down, because when we can practice our own patience to allow some person to conclude their thoughts and describe what they might be feeling, then it can really help to clarify again what their overall message might be trying, what they might be trying to convey. Then finally, I'd like to also reference a couple things about the understanding portion of active listening. And these are specifically about using techniques like paraphrasing or asking open-ended questions regarding what you're being told, or even providing feedback in terms of the way or the content or what it is exactly you're speaking about. So the idea of paraphrasing is basically that when you're told something, you repeat that information back to the other person in a slightly different wording. And that shows the other person that you are actually ingesting what they're saying. You're telling the other person, I'm here, I heard you, let me make sure that I got it right, and you say it back to them. And that is one of the most kind, heartwarming things that you will ever experience when someone is truly present in a conversation. The open-ended questions portion of this is also, it goes along a similar line. So in other words, when you ask somebody a question regarding the topic that you're discussing, when you leave it open-ended, you allow the conversation to explore further. You're, in other words, inviting the other person to express more of what they're saying. And finally, providing feedback. At the end of a discussion, especially one that is on a divisive subject, I think it's very important to also talk with the other person. Literally, whenever I've had a heated discussion on some sort of a topic that is important to me, I will often reflect with the other person and say, that was a really good conversation. I actually really enjoyed that. Like the way that you presented this in this point, or the way that you highlighted that, or that was a good argument, or something like that. Because you take the subject and you remove it from the individual. You say, you're almost acknowledging the product of the conversation itself versus just the other individual. And I feel like that's also a very fun way to kind of build a connection, because it's almost like you might be having like a boxing match, but at the end you guys are still friends, And I think that's a very good and healthy way to have discussions on topics that might be a little bit more thought-provoking. Now, all of this goes to say that one of the biggest things that we need to do is avoid the urge to speak ourselves. So we have to overcome this internal urge to want to just like pipe up and speak and talk over other people and whatnot. And this is something that I really think takes practice, a lot of practice, especially since like in school from our youth, we're basically taught that the second a question is asked or the second someone is speaking, we're rewarded by being the first one to raise our hand and blurt out the answer, even though we haven't really taken a chance to process and come up with our own thought. So that is something that I really think is necessary to be practiced more mindfully. And the other thing is, I think we also need to value silence a little bit. We should also allow silence to be present in a conversation. I don't think it's important that every second of a conversation is full of just yapping. When we take a second to pause, you actually allow your brain to catch up to what's being said, process, and truly proceed before you make any irrational decision or any irrational judgment. I'm not saying like sit there in silence staring at each other for like a minute, but between sentences, take a minute, take a second, and just brief pause. What was that? What did I just say? What did that other person say? Okay, I got it. Let's continue. I don't even think there's a problem in asking mid-conversation to say, hey, okay, one sec. I just need to think about what you just said so I can formulate a response. That kind of thing makes conversation and debate and discussion a lot more interesting, in my opinion, because you actually come to the table with more prepared arguments or thoughts or discussions. And I think it goes a long way into also helping you not feel dumb, which is a very significant thing when you're having a heated debate. I think it's important that we also protect our own egos, our own feelings, because then it can otherwise it can really allow discussions to just spiral downhill. So the last thing I really want to just say is I hope that you guys can maybe just try and make this more of a regular habit. Try practicing occasions where you catch yourself in a conversation and you really tell yourself to focus and only focus on that conversation. And you'll maybe even notice with strangers, with friends, with people close to you, what an impact it makes in not only what the other person is saying, but also how the other person might start responding because they're identifying that you are listening more. It really changes the dynamic of a relationship when the other person starts to notice that you're really present, you're there. And I really think that it's one of the best things that you can do to establish a well, meaningful, and really powerful relationship with someone else. So that's it, everybody. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this episode back. I am, like I said, feeling a little rusty, but I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to keep going with this. I'm really excited to see what we get up to in 2024. I truly think that this is going to be our year. And yeah, I could not thank you enough for tuning back in. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you all in the next one. Thank you very much. Peace.